Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Time's celebration of International Women's Day here at our first ever Voices of the Future Summit. Joining us next are actor and producer Cate Blanchett and producer Stacey Sher in conversation moderated by Time's Raisa Bruner.
Hi, I'm Time staff writer Raisa Bruner, and I'm joined today by actor, producer, and humanitarian Cate Blanchett and producer Stacey Sher. Thank you so much both for being here today. So Stacey and Cate, you worked together on the Hulu miniseries Mrs. America, which came out last spring. The show brings to life the very fraught politics of the 1970s and some of its most vocal activists. And Cate, you played Phyllis Schlafly, who is a very complicated figure who successfully combated the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. What did you learn from sharing that story, and how has that impacted you today?
Just how terrifying and polarizing any sort of civil discussion around the notion of equality is in America. And I'm, much to my shame, when Stacey and I first started speaking about the project, I was not aware that the American Constitution didn't accept the notion that one couldn't discriminate on the basis of sex, of gender. So the whole process of making Mrs. America was a learning curve. But I think where I wanted to lean in was that women are not a monolith. And I think that's something that the series really deals with. And so that means dealing with second wave feminism and the process of wanting to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, and including as many voices as possible. And that includes Phyllis Schlafly. So it was a process for me of having to set my own worldview and politics aside. I'm for not for black and white examination of anything. I'm for nuance, which I think is the polar opposite of where Phyllis, how she looks at the world. So it was quite difficult, but I think I found it hugely educative.
And Stacey, you have an incredible resume as a producer. You worked on all kinds of projects from Pulp Fiction to Erin Brockovich, Reno 911, and then this. Why did you want to add Mrs. America to that list? What was so important and compelling to you about this story?
Cate always likes to say that because she grew up in Australia, she always identified as a feminist. I grew up in a kind of backlashy America where it became the F word, and I became a feminist really and comfortable with saying that in the 90s. And I was interested in looking at the backlash to the women's movement. And at the time we began, it was really in the lead up to the 2016 election. And when Donald Trump was elected, the story really became the story of how we got here from there. So I mean, that's really has been my enduring interest in it. And if you don't understand Phyllis Schlafly, you don't understand how we have Amy Coney Barrett, you know?
It's interesting because the show came out almost a whole year ago, and in some ways it feels like everything has changed since then, but also in some ways nothing has changed. So what do you think the legacy of this show has been over the past year? What have you taken away from the experience and the conversation that it sparked? Cate?
Well, I think what has been revealed by the pandemic, if we didn't already know it, is that we're all, and it's not just America, it's globally, we're dealing with systemic inequality. And it's not just gender inequality, it's economic inequality, societal inequalities, cultural inequality. And all roads lead to Rome in terms of, I mean, if your constitution doesn't ratify the notion of equality, how can anything that precedes be approach equal? And I on a daily basis, I found this, you know, from people that have seen the series and perhaps come late to it. It's just every day, and this is our experience on set as well, is that we'd think that certain things may have been committed in sitting in aspic back in the 70s or early 80s, but yet something would happen. We'd read something in the New York Times or Huffington Post or wherever, or on a conservative blogger website where the bathroom debate was coming up yet again. It continues to reveal itself. And I think because we think because we've made a lot of so-called technological progress, that we've made societal progress. And I just think we're realizing that we really haven't moved that far. I mean, the people, a big quadrant of society that's really suffering are mothers in the pandemic, because still the division of labor at home is unequal. And so I think that a lot of people have been reflecting on how did we get here, which is, of course, what motivated us, reeling from the results of the 2016 election. And of course, race is an incredible issue in America that must be addressed, but also the misogyny that was just rampant, and it has been rampant over the last 4 years and gone unchecked and undealt with. I think people are wanting to approach story as a place to have a non-polarizing, inclusive discussion about that. And I do think that is something that story can do. I mean, we had such an extraordinary cast, and so we came at the notion of the Equal Rights Amendment from many, many different angles. I think it's got a lot of entry points for a broad audience.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned the importance of these different stories that we're starting to tell and bringing more inclusive projects and voices to the screen. Stacey, as a producer, you can see better than most the direction that Hollywood is headed. What do you want to see more of? And do you feel like there is change happening in that environment? Do you have a mission or a plan in terms of the types of things that you want to attach yourself to going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I'm so happy that we were able to begin to shine a light on Shirley Chisholm and her extraordinary accomplishments. I think we're starting to see it. I was just completely captivated by Nomadland, and to see Chloe Zhao's poetic and beautiful eye trained on American life. It was transformative and transporting. So, I'm a huge fan of Insecure. I love being in Issa Rae's worldview. When you look at like director Bong Joon-ho and Parasite and last year, running the tables in the Oscars, I think what we're getting is the freshness and the renewal of voice in our industry comes from different voices and seeing the world through different eyes. In the same way that when I saw Midnight Cowboy, I didn't know anybody like Ratso Rizzo and Joe Buck. I'm now like totally dating myself, but to give you a super old movie. But I was able to experience the singularity of their humanity and the commonality of our life experiences. And that's what's so exciting about intersectional storytelling. We get to go to different places, and that's what storytelling is about, for me at least.
Absolutely.
But I think too that Hollywood is a bit of a nostalgic concept, and I think that there's so many ways that you can view stories now that you don't necessarily, because form is content in a lot of ways. Sorry to sound sort of like an advertising slogan, but when you can find different forms and you can make find the right place and size and space, you can find different audiences, and those audiences will shift the horrible algorithms that we've been force-fed for so many years.
Well, both of you, though, have made notable efforts continually over the decades to, be part of stories that are led by complicated female figures. Cate, you especially have taken on such a variety of different roles of, figures that aren't always super likable, but have a powerful story to tell. So why has that been something you've been drawn to?
I think, it's sort of it's active anthropology for me, the whole process of uncovering stuff, no matter what genre you're in. If you're doing an action film, then you can the myriad of action films that you can watch, you suddenly learn so much about that genre. And I think the same is often said for women who have lived interesting lives. I think when I was starting out in my career, what used to happen, though, is that they were incredibly complicated women in very reductive narratives. And so the process was ultimately incredibly frustrating, hence the notion of the pejorative term biopic, because it is not simply enough to have an interesting life. There are millions of women who have, and I would rather read a book about it. But what happens is that if, when I was first starting out, is you might make a story, a film about an interesting woman, but the narrative would, just be the same story rehashed, or it wouldn't have a chance to be marketed and seen. And so therefore it compounded this idea that stories with women at the center didn't make any money, or no one was interested in seeing them. And I think the wonderful thing, there's positives and negatives about this so-called streaming revolution, but the positive thing is that there is a myriad of voices out there now, and a myriad of ways of consuming those stories. And so, most of to what Stacey was saying about some of her favorite films this year, or screen experiences, the majority of mine are by women. Now, that's not just because I'm looking for them, that's just because they're there. You can see a broader audience gets to see Kelly Reichardt's First Cow, or that incredible Garrett Bradley's documentary Time. All of those things that you can see, which speak to experiences outside your own. And so I find that so exciting.
So since we're talking about movies this year and we're in the middle of awards season, I want to go there. Stacey, you are involved in the production of the upcoming Oscars. Award shows have been the subject of a lot of conversation lately. Do you think that some of the criticisms are appropriate? And how can we as audiences find new meaning or connect in new ways with these shows?
Well, I'm not going to throw rocks at anybody else, since, that's a setup for me at this moment in time. Look, it's very challenging, but I think that, like everything that we're seeing in our society that needs to be shook up a little bit, now's the time to do it, when the rules that apply to everything cannot apply because of the pandemic and for the need for change, for deep change. So I think you return, I'm very romantic about the notion of storytelling and its ability to provide meaning and community in our lives. And I think that that's the thing that we have to lean into. Look, there are a lot of things that are said about Hollywood, right? But we are a union business that figured out how to get our mostly blue collar crews back to work safely with less than a 1% infection rate. And we take care of our own. This year, the Oscars are honoring with the Hirschholt Award, the Motion Picture Television Fund, and those heroic frontline workers in the nursing home at the home in Woodland Hills. So I think, we haven't done a very good job, ironically, telling our own story, because it becomes reduced down to what are you wearing, and as opposed to how do you want people to see, and how do you want to transform people's lives through these incredible empathy machines that are cinemas.
Yeah. And Cate, are you encouraged by changes that have been made in the industry and the types of projects that are cropping up this year or that are on your plate going forward?
Yes, there's almost too much being made in some respects. It's sort of you have that sense that you can't possibly watch everything, which is exciting on one level. But definitely, when we were just talking about it earlier, Stacey and I were saying that when we sat down to make a list of directors that we wanted to work with, just out of our mouths poured a whole raft of female directors that we wanted to work with. And, it was scores without even thinking about it. And I don't think that is a conversation that we would have felt confident in taking towards, a streaming platform or then a studio, and knowing that we could get them approved. And it's just a no-brainer. But it's also, unlike Phyllis Schlafly, who was very, very happy being the only woman in the room, I don't think any of us want to be the only woman in the room. And so I think that there's a real sense of there's a real collegiate spirit, and I'm not just amongst women, amongst men, because I think when you walk onto set and you're the only woman and there's 35 men in front of you, the conversation, the jokes, the outcome will always be the same. And we're a creative industry that thrives on exciting sort of restless churn of ideas. And when those ideas have a lot of different, come from a lot of different perspectives, the outcome will be much more exciting. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be emerging into an industry like this, because it's full of possibilities, I think.
Well, on that very uplifting and optimistic note, we'll end this conversation. Cate, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us for the Time Voices of the Future Women's Summit. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.